The scorching afternoon sun hung low over the sweeping plains of Montana Territory, casting long shadows across the withering grass as Daniel Hawthorne surveyed his domain from atop his dappled gray stallion. At 47, the rancher's weather-beaten face told the story of 2 decades spent building the Double H Ranch into one of the most prosperous cattle operations in Paradise Valley. His calloused hands gripped the reins with the casual confidence of a man accustomed to commanding both beast and land, while his eyes, sharp as a hawk's, despite the crow's feet etching their corners, scanned the borders of his property with a mixture of pride and restlessness. The Hawthorne legacy stretched for thousands of acres, but Daniel's gaze continually drifted to the modest homestead that stubbornly persisted on the adjacent plot, the final piece of the empire he envisioned. Beneath the wide brim of his Stetson, his expression hardened as he observed a slender figure moving purposefully around the small farmhouse that had become both an irritation and an obsession. "Mr. Hawthorne," a voice called out, breaking the contemplative silence. Young Billy Jenkins, barely 17 and eager to prove his worth as a ranch hand, galloped toward him with an urgency that suggested important news. "Mr. Hawthorne, the cattle broker from Helena arrived early, says he can't stay past sundown and needs to see you right away about the fall drive prices." The boy's freckled face was flushed with the responsibility of delivering this message, his eyes wide with respect for the man who employed half the able-bodied men in the county. Daniel's jaw tightened momentarily. Business was business, but his attention had been focused elsewhere. With a reluctant nod, he turned his horse toward the main house, casting one final glance at the neighboring property where Catherine Sullivan had been defiantly maintaining her late father's homestead for the past 8 months. That stubborn woman was going to sell to him eventually, one way or another, and Daniel Hawthorne was not a man accustomed to waiting. Hey folks, thanks for watching our channel. If you're enjoying this story so far, please consider subscribing to support more content like this. I'm curious, what city are you watching from today? Drop it in the comments below. Now, let's get back to our story of the Montana Territory. The broker's visit concluded with handshakes and promises of the highest prices the market had seen in years. But Daniel found his thoughts repeatedly drifting to the Sullivan homestead throughout the negotiations. After seeing the man off, he retreated to his study, a room that spoke of hard-earned success with its leather-bound books, oak desk, and the mounted head of the first bull that had nearly killed him when he'd arrived in Montana with nothing but determination and $20 to his name. Pouring himself 2 fingers of whiskey, he stood before the large window that framed a perfect view of Catherine Sullivan's land, a modest but fertile stretch nestled against the foothills, fed by a creek that Daniel coveted almost as much as the land itself. The property was the missing puzzle piece in his expansion plans, an oversight he hadn't anticipated when old Jeremiah Sullivan had stubbornly refused every offer for 20 years. Daniel had assumed the daughter would be more practical than her father once she inherited. Yet 8 months of increasingly generous offers had yielded nothing but polite rejections. Across the property line, Catherine Sullivan wiped sweat from her brow as she finished stacking firewood against the side of her cabin, preparing for the approaching winter that old-timers predicted would arrive early and bitter. At 32, she possessed a quiet beauty that flourished despite, or perhaps because of, her practical nature. Her chestnut hair was tied back in a simple braid, and her capable hands showed the calluses of someone who'd worked alongside her father from childhood, learning the ways of the land and livestock. The small herd of dairy cows and the vegetable garden provided just enough to sustain her modest needs, while occasional seamstress work in town supplemented her income. Catherine had returned from teaching in Bozeman when her father's health began failing, intending to stay only until he recovered. Instead, she'd buried him behind the cabin he built with his own hands and found herself unexpectedly determined to preserve what he'd created. The Hawthorne offers, delivered with increasing frequency and financial enticement, remained unopened in a drawer inside. The following morning brought the first hint of autumn chill as Daniel rode out with his foreman, Marcus Blackwood, a former Union cavalry sergeant whose tactical mind had helped expand the Hawthorne operation through strategic acquisitions and efficient management. The Sullivan woman refused offer number 12, Daniel stated flatly as they rode along the boundary between the properties. I increased it by 20% over the last one. Marcus, a man of few words and calculated thoughts, studied his employer's profile before responding. Some folks value heritage more than dollars, boss. Her daddy built that place from nothing. Daniel's eyes narrowed as he watched a curl of smoke rise from Catherine's chimney. Every man has a price, Marcus. I'm just not convinced money is hers. The statement hung between them, pregnant with implication. As they continued their inspection of the fence line that separated Hawthorne ambition from Sullivan determination, Catherine noticed the two riders observing her property from a distance, recognizing the distinctive silhouette of Daniel Hawthorne, even without being able to discern his features. Something about the man's persistent attention sent an involuntary shiver down her spine, not entirely unpleasant, which troubled her more than she cared to admit. She had met him only a handful of times since returning to care for her father, each encounter leaving her with conflicted impressions. There was no denying his success or capability. The Double H Ranch employed dozens of workers and had brought prosperity to the region. Yet there was something in his unwavering focus, his assumption that everything and everyone had a price, that bristled against her principles. Turning away from the window, she focused instead on the letter she'd received yesterday from the bank in Livingston, informing her that her father's outstanding loan was coming due faster than she'd anticipated. The timing was suspicious enough to make her wonder if Hawthorne's influence extended to the banking establishment as well. The town of Redemption Springs consisted of little more than a single dusty main street, but it served as the commercial and social hub for ranchers and homesteaders spread across 20 miles of territory. Daniel's weekly visit to pick up supplies coincided, not entirely accidentally, with Catherine's regular trip to sell eggs and vegetables to the general store. He watched from the doorway of the saloon as she concluded her business with Elijah Thompson, the storekeeper who'd been running the mercantile for nearly 3 decades. Her simple calico dress couldn't disguise the natural grace of her movements, and Daniel found himself wondering, not for the first time, what it would be like to see her in the finer fabrics befitting the mistress of a ranch like the Double H. Finishing his whiskey in a single swallow, he stepped into the street, timing his path to intersect with hers as she loaded her empty basket into her wagon. "Miss Sullivan," he greeted, removing his hat in a gesture of respect that came surprisingly naturally. "Mr. Hawthorne," she replied, her tone polite but guarded as she secured her meager purchases. Up close, he could see the flecks of gold in her hazel eyes, the small furrow between her brows that appeared whenever she addressed him. "I trust you received my latest correspondence?" The question was rhetorical. His messenger had confirmed delivery. Catherine's hands stilled on the wagon ties, and she turned to face him fully, squaring her shoulders in a gesture that reminded him forcibly of her father. "Mr. Hawthorne, I appreciate your persistence, but my answer remains unchanged. The Sullivan homestead is not for sale. Not now, not ever. My father built that place board by board, and I intend to honor his memory by maintaining it." Daniel stepped closer, lowering his voice though there was no one near enough to overhear. "Miss Sullivan, Catherine, perhaps we've been approaching this from the wrong angle. Would you do me the honor of dining at the Double H this Saturday? No talk of land or offers, just neighborly conversation." The invitation caught Catherine entirely off guard, and she found herself momentarily speechless, studying the rancher's face for signs of manipulation or ulterior motive. What she saw instead was something unexpected, a flicker of genuine interest that transcended business matters. "Mr. Hawthorne, she began, uncertain how to respond to this shift in their established dynamic. He saved her from immediate decision by adding, "Think about it. My housekeeper, Mrs. Abernathy, makes a chicken and dumplings that would make even the most stubborn Sullivan reconsider their priorities." The comment, delivered with the ghost of a smile, hinted at a sense of humor she hadn't previously associated with the stern rancher. Despite herself, Catherine felt the corners of her mouth tugging upward. "I'll consider it," she finally replied, knowing even as she spoke that curiosity would likely overcome caution. Daniel replaced his hat with a satisfied nod, as if he'd just concluded a particularly favorable business transaction. "6 o'clock. I'll send the carriage." He walked away before she could formulate a response, leaving Catherine to wonder what game the rancher was playing, and why she felt an unexpected flutter of anticipation at the prospect of discovering the answer. The Double H main house stood as a testament to Daniel's vision and success. A 2-story structure of solid timber with a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides, glass windows imported from St. Louis, and furnishings that blended frontier practicality with Eastern refinement. As the carriage carrying Catherine approached, lanterns illuminated the windows against the darkening sky, creating an almost ethereal glow that transformed the ranch house into something from another world. Catherine had dressed in her finest, a deep blue dress that had been her mother's, altered to fit her taller frame, with a cameo brooch at the collar that represented her only piece of jewelry. Her hair was arranged in a more elaborate style than her usual practical braid, and she had debated with herself for nearly an hour before accepting the invitation, ultimately swayed by a curiosity that overrode her natural caution. The carriage driver, a weathered cowhand who introduced himself as Pete, helped her down with courteous efficiency. "The boss has been in a rare mood all day, Miss Sullivan," he confided, with a conspiratorial wink. "Had the boys polishing everything that don't move and some things that do." Daniel waited on the porch, dressed in a tailored suit that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders and the lean strength built through years of ranch work. For a moment, as Catherine approached, an expression of genuine appreciation crossed his features before he schooled them back to polite welcome. "Miss Sullivan," he greeted, extending his hand to assist her up the steps. "You honor my home with your presence." The formality of his words was belied by the warmth in his tone, and Catherine found herself responding to the latter rather than the former. "Mr. Hawthorne, thank you for the invitation." Her hand rested briefly in his, and she noted the contrast between the strength evident in his grip and the gentleness with which he held her fingers. Inside, the house revealed a blend of masculine practicality and unexpected refinement. Leather furniture shared space with delicate china displayed in a cabinet. Hunting trophies, overlooked shelves of well-worn books, and a piano stood in one corner, its polished surface suggesting regular use rather than mere decoration. "Do you play?" she asked, gesturing toward the instrument. Daniel shook his head. "My late wife, Margaret. She insisted on bringing it from Philadelphia when we married. I keep it tuned in her memory, though no one's touched the keys in 15 years." The mention of his deceased wife created a momentary shift in atmosphere, humanizing the rancher in a way that Catherine hadn't anticipated. She followed him to the dining room, where a table set for two with fine china and crystal glasses awaited them. Mrs. Abernathy, a robust woman with a no-nonsense demeanor and shrewd eyes that missed nothing, served them a meal that indeed lived up to Daniel's promises. The conversation flowed more easily than either had expected, moving from local matters to books they had both read, to memories of their respective childhoods. His in the crowded tenements of Chicago, hers on the frontier with parents who had come west with the first wave of settlers after the war. "I never understood how my father could refuse your offers," Catherine admitted as they moved to the sitting room after dinner, where Daniel poured sherry for her and whiskey for himself. "Not from a financial perspective. The amounts were more than generous. But I couldn't understand how a man of business like yourself couldn't see that some things aren't for sale." Daniel studied the amber liquid in his glass before meeting her eyes. "I built the Double H from 100 acres and a dream, Catherine. When you create something from nothing, you develop a hunger to see how far you can take it." He moved to the window, gesturing toward the darkness that concealed the vast expanse of his ranch. "Every addition, every improvement, has been another chapter in a story I'm writing. Not just for myself, but for a legacy that will outlive me." He turned back to her, and in the lamplight, she could see the intensity that drove him. The ambition, yes, but also something deeper. "Your father's land, your land now. It's not just another parcel to me. It's the final piece that makes the whole picture complete." Catherine set down her glass, moved despite herself by the passion in his voice. "My father felt the same way about his homestead, Daniel. It wasn't grand or profitable like your ranch, but it was his life's work, his legacy. How can I dishonor that by selling it to become part of someone else's dream?" The evening concluded with a drive back to her homestead, under a canopy of stars so brilliant they seemed to illuminate the path ahead. Daniel himself had insisted on escorting her, handling the reins with the same confident precision he applied to every aspect of his life. The carriage moved slowly through the night, neither passenger particularly eager for the journey to end. "I had misconceptions about you, Mr. Hawthorne," Catherine admitted as they approached her property. "I imagined you as just another land-hungry baron with no thought beyond expansion." Daniel's chuckle was low and surprisingly self-deprecating. "And I suspected you were a sentimental woman clinging to the past out of stubbornness rather than conviction. It seems we've both had cause to reconsider our judgments." The carriage stopped before her modest cabin, the contrast between her home and his never more apparent than in this moment. Yet Catherine felt no embarrassment, only a quiet pride in the simplicity and honesty of her inheritance. Daniel stepped down first, turning to offer his hand. As she descended, her foot caught on the hem of her dress, sending her off balance and directly into his arms. For a suspended moment, they remained thus, her hands braced against his chest, his arms steadying her waist, their faces close enough that she could detect the faint scent of sandalwood and whiskey that clung to him. 3 days passed without word from the Double H, though Catherine found her thoughts repeatedly returning to the evening and its unexpected revelations. The autumn air carried a sharp chill now, and she rose before dawn to tend to her animals, her breath forming small clouds in the cold morning light. As she milked the cows, she heard the distinctive sound of hoofbeats approaching, too many for a casual visitor. Emerging from the barn, she found Daniel Hawthorne accompanied by 4 of his ranch hands, all mounted and leading pack horses laden with supplies. "Miss Sullivan," he called, dismounting with fluid grace despite the early hour and his formal attire. "I hope we're not intruding too early." Catherine approached cautiously, noticing that the men began unloading lumber, tools, and other building materials, without awaiting instructions. "Hawthorne, what is the meaning of this?" Daniel removed his hat, revealing hair still damp from morning ablutions, his expression uncharacteristically hesitant. "I've been thinking about our conversation, about legacies and dreams." He gestured toward the materials his men were organizing. "Your father built this place to last, but even the sturdiest structures need maintenance. I'd like to offer my men's services to repair your roof before winter sets in properly. Replace those porch boards that are starting to rot and reinforce the barn wall that's leaning." Catherine's initial instinct was to refuse, to interpret the gesture as another tactic to make her dependent or obligated. Yet the earnestness in Daniel's expression gave her pause. "Why would you do this?" she asked directly, searching his face for hidden motives. His answer came without hesitation. "Because I respect what your father built and what you're trying to preserve. This isn't about buying your land anymore, Catherine. It's about—" He paused, seeming to search for words that wouldn't come easily to a man more accustomed to commands than confessions. "It's about wanting to be part of your story, even if you don't become part of mine." The ranch hands busied themselves with unloading, tactfully pretending not to overhear this exchange. Catherine studied Daniel's face, noting the vulnerability that had never been present in their previous interactions. After a long moment, she nodded slowly. "The roof does leak something terrible when the snow melts. I'd be a fool to refuse good help before winter." The smile that transformed Daniel's features was worth the momentary surrender of her independence. Over the following weeks, the relationship between Catherine Sullivan and Daniel Hawthorne evolved in ways neither had anticipated. The repair work on her homestead provided a natural pretext for daily interaction, with Daniel himself often joining his men despite the demands of his own ranch. Catherine found herself looking forward to his visits, to the conversations that ranged from practical matters of animal husbandry to philosophical discussions about the meaning of progress in the changing West. One evening, as they shared coffee on her newly repaired porch while watching his men pack up for the day, Daniel broached a subject that had been notably absent from their recent exchanges. "I've instructed my lawyer to tear up the purchase offers for your land," he stated without preamble, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains turning purple in the fading light. Catherine turned to study his profile, surprised by both the declaration and the sense of relief it triggered. "May I ask what prompted this decision?" Daniel's weathered hands cradled his coffee cup, the steam rising between them like the ghost of former intentions. "I realized I was trying to acquire something valuable for the wrong reasons. There are other ways to secure a legacy than simply accumulating acres." The first significant snowfall arrived in early November, transforming the landscape into a pristine expanse of white that glittered like diamond dust in the morning sunlight. Catherine woke to find her path to the barn already cleared, and Daniel Hawthorne waiting with his sleigh to transport her to the Thanksgiving gathering at the Double H, an invitation extended to all his workers and their families, as well as select neighbors from surrounding properties. The main house had been decorated with pine boughs and red ribbons, the delicious aromas of roasting turkey and spiced cider permeating every room. Catherine found herself welcomed not as a curiosity or an adversary, but as an honored guest whose opinion was sought on matters ranging from the preparation of cranberry sauce to the appropriate response to the railroad's latest shipping rates. As the evening progressed, she observed Daniel moving among his people, for they were his in more than mere employment, with a genuine concern for their welfare and a leadership style that commanded respect without demanding it. Later, as the gathering began to disperse, he found her by the fireplace, contemplating the dancing flames. "You've built more than a ranch here," she acknowledged, gesturing toward the departing families. "You've created a community." Daniel's response was to take her hand, a gesture that felt increasingly natural, despite its impropriety by Eastern standards. "Communities need foundations beyond economics, Catherine. They need shared values, traditions." He hesitated before adding, "partnerships based on mutual respect." The implication hung between them, neither quite ready to articulate the shifting nature of their relationship. "Mr. Hawthorne," she began, then corrected herself with a small smile. "Daniel, I believe I've misjudged your intentions toward my property." His eyes, gray as the winter sky, held hers steadily. "And I believe I've been looking at the Sullivan homestead through the wrong lens entirely. It's not the land I've come to value most over these past weeks." Catherine felt a warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with the nearby fire. "Perhaps," she suggested with newfound boldness, "we should discuss a different kind of merger than the one you originally proposed." Daniel's laugh, a rare and treasured sound, echoed through the empty room. "Miss Sullivan, are you proposing a business arrangement?" She raised an eyebrow, enjoying the unusual sensation of having momentarily outmaneuvered the strategic rancher. "I'm suggesting we explore options for combining our respective legacies in a manner that preserves the integrity of both." The Christmas Eve service at Redemption Springs Small Church brought together the entire community, with ranchers and townspeople alike crowded into the simple wooden structure illuminated by dozens of candles. Catherine sat beside Daniel in the front pew, acutely aware of the speculative glances and whispered comments their proximity generated among the congregation. The gossip had been building for weeks as Daniel's carriage was seen regularly at the Sullivan homestead, and Catherine had become a fixture at Double H gatherings. After the service, as they stood receiving congratulations on their officially announced engagement, Sheriff Thomas Blackwood approached with an expression that immediately put Daniel on alert. "Hate to intrude on the festivities," the lawman began, his voice low enough that only they could hear. "But there's trouble brewing you should know about. Hawthorne, the Cattlemen's Association is pushing through that new grazing rights bill, and word is they're using some underhanded methods to pressure smaller landholders into selling before the territorial legislature votes next month." Daniel's expression darkened, his protective instinct immediately engaged. "Catherine's land?" The sheriff nodded grimly. Already had reports of stray cattle mysteriously appearing on 3 small homesteads along the river. Fences cut, water rights suddenly disputed. Catherine felt Daniel's arm tighten around her waist. "We need to return to your property immediately," he stated. Any trace of celebration vanished from his tone. The journey back to her homestead was tense, with Daniel repeatedly scanning the darkness for signs of trouble. They crested the final rise to find their fears confirmed. In the moonlight, they could make out dozens of cattle roaming freely across Catherine's fields, the fence line visibly damaged in multiple places. Daniel's expression hardened into something she had never witnessed before, the ruthless determination that had built his empire from nothing. "This changes everything," he said flatly, turning the carriage toward the Double H instead. "Those cattle bear the Broken Spur brand, Harrison Fletcher's outfit. He's been trying to control the valley for years." The following days became a blur of activity as Daniel mobilized his considerable resources to protect Catherine's property, while simultaneously orchestrating a counter-strategy against Fletcher and his allies in the Cattlemen's Association. Ranch hands patrolled the Sullivan boundaries around the clock, repairing fences as quickly as they were damaged, and documenting every incident of trespassing or sabotage. Catherine found herself moved into the Double H main house for safety, though she insisted on daily visits to maintain her animals and garden. The situation escalated when Fletcher's men attempted to dam the creek that provided water to both properties, leading to a tense confrontation that stopped just short of gunfire. "This isn't just about your land anymore," Daniel explained as they reviewed a map spread across his study desk. "Fletcher and his association cronies are trying to force out every small landholder in the territory before the new governor takes office. They want to control all the water rights from here to the Yellowstone." Catherine studied the strategic positions marked on the map, her teacher's mind quickly grasping the larger pattern. "They're creating a monopoly," she concluded, "and my property is the linchpin because of how the creek divides." Daniel nodded, impressed as always by her quick understanding. "Which is why our wedding needs to happen immediately, not in the spring as we planned." The abrupt statement caught Catherine off guard, and he hurried to explain. "As your fiancé, I have limited legal standing to represent your interests. As your husband, I can appear before the territorial court on behalf of our combined properties." He took her hands, his expression softening from strategic to tender. "This isn't how I wanted to propose advancing our timeline, Catherine. I'd planned something rather more romantic than a discussion of water rights and legal maneuvering." Despite the seriousness of the situation, Catherine found herself smiling. "Daniel Hawthorne, are you suggesting we marry for purely practical purposes?" He pulled her into his arms, his embrace conveying what words sometimes failed to express. "I'm suggesting we move up the timeline for reasons both practical and personal. Fletcher's actions have forced my hand in terms of timing, but make no mistake. I want you as my wife because you've become essential to me in ways that have nothing to do with property lines." Judge Harmon officiated the ceremony in the Double H parlor 3 days later, with Marcus Blackwood standing as Daniel's best man, and Mrs. Abernathy serving as Catherine's matron of honor. Snow fell steadily outside, but inside, the house was warm with pine fires and filled with fragrant winter blooms that Daniel had ordered by telegraph from as far away as Denver. Catherine wore a gown of ivory silk that had arrived miraculously quickly from a dressmaker in Helena, while Daniel cut an imposing figure in a new black suit that emphasized his height and the power contained in his frame. The ceremony itself was brief but heartfelt, with the judge concluding, "What began as a dispute over boundaries has transformed into a union that transcends mere property. May your marriage prove as resilient as the land you both cherish, and may your combined legacy flourish for generations to come." As Daniel sealed their vows with a kiss that communicated far more than property agreements, the assembled ranch hands and household staff erupted in cheers and applause, genuinely delighted by the union of two people whose initial antagonism had blossomed into obvious devotion. The legal battle that followed tested the newly forged Hawthorne alliance, with Fletcher and the association employing every underhanded tactic available to discredit Daniel's evidence of tampering and harassment. The territorial court proceedings dragged on through the bitter Montana winter, while tensions on the ground manifested in increasingly dangerous confrontations between rival ranch hands. Through it all, Catherine discovered reserves of strength she hadn't known she possessed, standing firmly beside her husband in public forums, while helping to manage both properties behind the scenes. The turning point came unexpectedly in late February, when a blizzard of historic proportions descended on the valley, trapping livestock and threatening lives across all ranches, regardless of ownership. Daniel organized a rescue effort that transcended property disputes, directing his men to save cattle bearing the broken spur brand with the same urgency as those with the Double H mark. The collaborative survival effort shifted public opinion decisively, making Fletcher's continuing legal maneuvers appear petty and dangerous in comparison to Daniel's community-minded leadership. Spring arrived with a judicial decision that upheld the property rights of all smaller landholders, including the now combined Hawthorne Holdings that incorporated Catherine's homestead as a legally protected entity with its own water rights in perpetuity. The Sullivan cabin, rather than being absorbed into the Double H operation, was expanded and renovated to serve as a schoolhouse for the children of ranch workers and neighboring families, a purpose that honored both Catherine's teaching background and her father's commitment to education. On a warm evening in May, as wildflowers painted the valley in a riot of colors, Daniel and Catherine stood on the porch of the main house, his arm around her waist as they surveyed the prosperous operation that represented their shared vision. "I never expected to find someone who could both challenge and complete me," Daniel admitted, pressing a kiss to her temple. "When I first set eyes on your land, all I saw was the missing piece of my empire. I never imagined the woman who came with it would become the heart of everything I value." Catherine leaned into his embrace, her hand unconsciously moving to rest on the slight swell of her stomach, where their first child, the true beginning of their combined legacy, had just begun to make its presence known. "I remember telling you I didn't need your land," she mused, recalling their early confrontations with fond amusement. "And you told me you wanted my heart to grow your legacy. I thought it was just another negotiating tactic." Daniel turned her gently in his arms until she faced him, his expression serious despite the happiness evident in his eyes. "It was the most honest offer I've ever made, Mrs. Hawthorne. Land can be bought and sold. Buildings rise and fall. But what we've built together will outlast anything made of mere wood and stone." As the setting sun painted the Montana sky in shades of gold and crimson, Catherine reached up to trace the features of the man who had begun as her adversary and become her partner in every sense. "Our legacy," she agreed, sealing the sentiment with a kiss that promised generations of Hawthorns would continue to cherish and protect the land that had brought them together. In the distance, cattle grazed peacefully across boundless pastures, unaware of property lines and legal battles, simply existing in the harmony that Catherine and Daniel had fought so hard to achieve.